After a night with his mistress, his pregnant wife packed up, left divorce papers, and vanished. The November wind cut through Boston's streets like a blade, rattling the windows of the brownstone where Megan Dempsey stood at the kitchen counter, her 8-month pregnant belly pressing against the marble edge. The dinner she'd spent hours preparing, Derek's favorite lamb with rosemary, the same dish from their first date, sat cooling on the dining table, untouched. The candles she'd lit at 7 had burned down to stubs. It was past midnight now, their 3rd wedding anniversary, the day that was supposed to matter. Megan adjusted the silk maternity dress she'd bought specially for tonight, the deep emerald green that Derek once said made her eyes look like precious stones. Her wedding ring caught the candlelight as she reached for her phone, the diamond Derek had proudly chosen 3 years ago now feeling heavy on her swollen finger. Maybe he got caught up at the office again, she thought, though the excuse felt hollow even in her own mind. Derek's architecture firm had been struggling lately, but he'd promised, sworn, that tonight would be different. No clients, no calls, just them and their unborn son. She opened Instagram, scrolling through her feed mindlessly, when a photo made her blood freeze. There, tagged at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, their honeymoon hotel, was a picture that shattered her world. Her Derek in the hotel's signature bar, his arm around a stunning brunette. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting intimately on his chest. They looked like lovers. They looked like a couple celebrating something special. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., 23 minutes ago. Megan's hands trembled as she enlarged the photo. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of confident beauty that turned heads. Her dress was expensive, her jewelry real. This wasn't some random encounter. This was planned, intimate, deliberate. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. Megan pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the familiar flutter that usually brought her comfort. Tonight, it felt like a reminder of everything she stood to lose. She scrolled through the woman's profile. Kate Burton, marketing executive at Sterling & Associates. Hundreds of followers, dozens of photos from expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, charity galas. The kind of life Derek used to give Megan before the business started failing, before the stress lines appeared around his eyes, before he started working late 3 nights a week. Another photo appeared in Kate's story, Derek's hand covering hers across an intimate dinner table, wine glasses catching the soft restaurant lighting. The caption read, "Perfect evening with my favorite person." Megan's heart hammered against her ribcage. She scrolled back through months of Kate's posts, and there he was, Derek, appearing sporadically like a ghost haunting someone else's life, a shadow in the background at a gallery opening, a reflection in a restaurant window, his laugh captured in a video at a wine bar Megan had never been to. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she believed? How many nights had she fallen asleep alone, trusting his excuses about client meetings and project deadlines? The house suddenly felt suffocating. The carefully prepared dinner mocked her from the dining room. The nursery they'd been decorating together with its soft yellow walls and the rocking chair Derek had assembled himself now felt like a monument to her naivety. Megan walked slowly upstairs, each step deliberate despite the trembling in her legs. In their bedroom, she pulled out her suitcase, the same one they'd used for their honeymoon, to that very hotel where he was now betraying everything they'd built. She packed methodically, maternity clothes, essential documents, the ultrasound photos of their son. She left behind the jewelry Derek had given her, the expensive dresses, the life they'd created together. She took only what was hers alone. At her desk, she wrote a simple note on their wedding stationery. "Derek, I saw the photos. I know about Kate. I won't fight you, embarrass you, or make this messy. I just can't pretend anymore that this marriage exists. Don't look for me. Don't call my family. Don't make this harder than it already is. I'm keeping our son's last name as Mitchell, my maiden name. He deserves better than growing up in a house built on lies. Take care of yourself. Megan." She placed the divorce papers her lawyer had prepared months ago. Yes, she'd known something was wrong, next to the note, along with her wedding ring. As dawn broke over Boston, Megan Dempsey closed the door of her old life behind her, her hand protectively cradling the child who would never know the father who'd chosen another woman over his family. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow night, baby." He had no idea that tomorrow he'd come home to an empty house and the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed. Derek Dempsey fumbled with his keys at the front door, his head pounding from too much wine and too little sleep. The November morning sun felt like daggers through his bloodshot eyes as he tried to shake off the guilt that had been gnawing at him since he'd left Kate's apartment an hour ago. Just one more night, he told himself. The same lie he'd been repeating for 8 months. After the baby comes, I'll end it. I'll focus on my family. The house was eerily quiet as he stepped inside. Usually by 8 a.m., Megan would be in the kitchen, humming softly while she prepared her morning tea, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. The smell of coffee and fresh flowers would greet him, along with her sleepy smile and a kiss that tasted like forgiveness for coming home late again. Today, there was only silence. "Megan?" he called out, hanging his coat in the hallway. "Honey, I'm sorry about last night. The client dinner ran way longer than expected." No answer. Derek walked into the kitchen, and his stomach dropped. The dinner table was still set from the night before. Their anniversary dinner he'd completely forgotten about until this moment. The candles had burned down completely. Wax pooled on the white tablecloth. His favorite meal sat cold and untouched, a tragic monument to his betrayal. "Oh God," he whispered, the weight of his selfishness crashing down on him. Their anniversary. How could he have forgotten their anniversary? He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, already rehearsing his apology. He'd tell her about the supposed client crisis, maybe buy her something beautiful to make up for it. Megan was understanding. She always was. Too understanding, perhaps. "Babe, are you feeling okay?" He pushed open their bedroom door and froze. The room was wrong. Megan's side of the closet gaped open, half empty. Her dresser drawers were pulled out, contents rifled through. The overnight bag she kept packed for the hospital was gone. Panic shot through his chest like ice water. "Megan!" He ran through the house, checking every room. The nursery they'd been decorating together looked untouched, the crib waiting patiently for their son. But in the guest bathroom, Megan's prenatal vitamins were gone, her favorite pillow missing from the couch where she'd taken to napping in the afternoons. Back in the kitchen, his eyes finally landed on the dining table, not the cold dinner, but the envelope propped against the centerpiece. His name was written across the front in Megan's careful handwriting. Derek's hands shook as he tore it open. The note was brief, devastating in its simplicity. With each word, his world crumbled a little more. By the time he reached her signature, his legs gave out and he collapsed into the chair where she should have been sitting, eating breakfast, planning their day. The divorce papers were crisp, official, final. His wedding ring sat on top of them like an accusation. "No, no, no." He fumbled for his phone, dialing her number with trembling fingers. It went straight to voicemail, her voice, warm and familiar, telling him to leave a message. "Megan, please. I can explain everything. Whatever you think you know, we can work through this. Think about the baby, think about us, call me back." He tried again, and again. Each call went to voicemail. Derek drove to her sister's house in Cambridge, pounding on the door until Claire answered, her 2-year-old balanced on her hip. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where's Megan?" Claire's face was ice. She'd always been protective of her younger sister, and the look in her eyes told Derek she knew everything. "She's safe. That's all you need to know." "She's my wife. She's carrying my child." "Your wife?" Claire laughed bitterly. "When's the last time you acted like a husband, Derek? When's the last time you put her first? You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I understand that my sister spent their anniversary alone, 8 months pregnant, while you were with another woman. I understand that she packed her bags at dawn with tears streaming down her face. I understand that she loves you so much she won't even fight you on this." The door slammed in his face. Derek spent the next 3 days in a frenzied search. He called her friends, her former colleagues, even drove to her college roommate's place in Vermont. No one had seen her, or if they had, they weren't telling him. Meanwhile, Kate's calls grew more frequent, more demanding. She'd seen the social media posts, friends and family noting Megan's sudden absence, the speculation, the whispered conversations. "This is perfect," Kate said over dinner at their usual restaurant, her manicured nails drumming against the wine glass. "Now we don't have to sneak around anymore. We can be together properly." Derek stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time in months. Her beauty, which had once captivated him, now seemed cold and calculated. Her ambition, which had excited him, felt selfish and cruel. "She's pregnant with my child," he said quietly. "And that changes what exactly?" Kate's voice was sharp. "You chose me, Derek. You've been choosing me for months. Don't get cold feet now because of some guilt trip." "Some guilt trip?" Derek's voice rose, drawing stares from other diners. "She's my wife. She trusted me." "Your soon-to-be ex-wife," Kate corrected smoothly, "who handed you divorce papers and ran away like a coward." "Honestly, Derek, you're better off without someone so dramatic." In that moment, Derek saw Kate Burton for who she really was. Not the confident, sophisticated woman he'd been infatuated with, but a cold opportunist who'd destroyed his family without a second thought. As he drove home alone that night, the empty house waiting for him like a tomb, Derek realized the terrible truth. He'd traded everything that mattered for something that was worth nothing at all. His phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Dinner tomorrow? I'm thinking we should start looking at apartments together." Derek turned off his phone and sat in his dark driveway, staring at the house where he'd lost everything that mattered. 300 miles north of Boston in the quiet town of Burlington, Vermont, Megan Mitchell sat in the sunroom of a cozy cottage, her hands resting on her belly as she watched snow fall gently outside. The name on her driver's license, bank accounts, and rental agreement was her maiden name, the identity she'd reclaimed the moment she decided to disappear. "How are you feeling today?" Dr. Laura Hayes asked, settling into the chair across from her with 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. Laura had been Megan's college roommate, and when Megan had called at dawn 3 weeks ago, sobbing and 8 months pregnant, Laura hadn't hesitated to offer sanctuary. "Better," Megan said honestly. "The baby's been active today. I think he likes the quiet here." Laura studied her friend's face. The dark circles under Megan's eyes had faded, and color had returned to her cheeks. But more importantly, the tension that had been carved into her features, the constant worry, the walking on eggshells anxiety, was finally beginning to ease. "Any regrets?" Laura asked gently. Megan was quiet for a long moment, watching a cardinal land on the snow-covered pine tree outside. "About leaving? No. About the years I spent making excuses for him? Every day." Back in Boston, Derek's world was unraveling in spectacular fashion. His architectural firm, already struggling, began hemorrhaging clients as word spread about his personal chaos. Kate, meanwhile, had moved from subtle suggestions to outright demands. "We need to make this official," she announced over breakfast at her expensive South End apartment, sliding a real estate listing across the table. "This penthouse just came on the market. Perfect for us." Derek stared at the price tag, $3 million. His firm hadn't seen that kind of money in 2 years. "Kate, I can't afford—" "You will once the divorce is finalized and you're not paying for that woman's expenses anymore." Kate's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "Besides, I've been thinking. My position at Sterling & Associates is about to become partner track. We could be quite the power couple." "Her name is Megan," Derek said quietly, "and she's carrying my child." Kate waved dismissively. "A child you might not even see if she's really serious about this disappearing act. Honestly, Derek, you're better off. Children are expensive, messy, and they limit your options." Derek felt something cold settle in his stomach. When had Kate become so callous? Or had she always been this way, and he'd been too intoxicated by the affair to notice? His phone rang. His business partner, James. "Derek, we need to talk. Today." An hour later, Derek sat in their conference room as James laid out the devastating numbers. 2 more clients had pulled out, citing personal concerns about Derek's reliability. The Johnson project, their biggest contract, was threatening to terminate unless Derek could get his personal life in order. "They know," James said simply, "about the affair, about Megan leaving. This is Boston, Derek. Everyone knows everyone. Your reputation is affecting the entire firm." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you should take a step back. Extended leave. Let me handle clients until this blows over." Derek's phone buzzed constantly. Kate, demanding to know where he was, why he wasn't answering, when they could look at apartments. Each text felt like a chain tightening around his neck. Meanwhile, in Vermont, Megan had found unexpected peace. She'd started working remotely, doing freelance design projects under her maiden name. The work was smaller than what she'd done at Derek's firm, but it was hers. Clean, honest, creative. "You know," Laura said one evening as they prepared dinner together, "there's an architect in town who's been asking about you. Well, about the mysterious new designer who's been getting all the buzz." "Laura, I'm not matchmaking," Laura laughed. "I'm talking business. Michael Carter owns the sustainable development firm that's transforming downtown Burlington. He's looking for a design partner for his next project." Megan paused in chopping vegetables. She hadn't thought about the future beyond having the baby safely. The idea of building something new, something that was entirely her own, sent a flutter of excitement through her chest. "Tell me about him," she said cautiously. "Brilliant, ethical, divorced with 2 kids he adores. Lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. He's kind, Megan. The kind of man who brings soup when you're sick and remembers your birthday without needing phone reminders." That night, Derek sat alone in his empty house, staring at the divorce papers Megan had left behind. Kate had stopped calling after he'd failed to show up for their apartment viewing. Her final text was brutal in its simplicity. "Call me when you decide to stop wallowing and start living." He thought about Megan, somewhere out there carrying their child. He'd hired a private investigator who'd turned up nothing. Megan had vanished as thoroughly as if she'd never existed, but he knew she was out there, probably at peace for the first time in months. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to have everything, he'd lost the only thing that had ever really mattered. Outside, snow began to fall, just as it was falling 300 miles away, where Megan sat by a warm fire, sketching designs for a sustainable housing project, and feeling her son move beneath her heart. For the first time in months, she was planning for tomorrow instead of surviving today. Derek, meanwhile, poured himself another drink and wondered if this was what rock bottom felt like, or if he still had farther to fall. The first cry pierced the quiet of Burlington Medical Center at 3:47 a.m. on a December morning. Megan Mitchell held her son for the first time, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the tiny, perfect face that held none of his father's features, only her own dark eyes and stubborn chin. "He's beautiful," Dr. Laura Hayes whispered, still in her scrubs from assisting with the delivery. "What's his name?" Megan had thought about this moment for months. She'd considered family names, meaningful words, anything that would give her son a fresh start untainted by the past. "Ethan," she said softly, then paused. Something about that name felt wrong, too close to names Derek had mentioned admiring. "No, wait." She looked down at her son again, seeing only her own features reflected back. "Lucas. Lucas Mitchell. Strong name," Laura smiled. "Like his mother." 200 miles away, Derek Dempsey sat in his office at 4 a.m. staring at his computer screen. The private investigator's latest report lay open beside him. Another dead end. Megan had covered her tracks too well. It was as if she'd simply evaporated. His phone buzzed. Kate again. "Derek, this silent treatment is getting old. I'm at the Mandarin Oriental. Room 412. We need to talk." He ignored the message, just as he'd ignored the previous 15. Kate's patience was wearing thin, and her true nature was becoming impossible to ignore. Yesterday, she'd shown up at his office, demanding to know why he wasn't taking her calls, why he hadn't looked at a single apartment listing she'd sent. "You're embarrassing me," she'd hissed in front of his secretary. "My friends are asking questions about when we're going public. I can't keep making excuses." "Maybe because this was a mistake," Derek had replied quietly. "All of it." Kate's face had gone ice cold. "Don't be stupid, Derek. You chose this, you chose me, you can't go backward now." But Derek was beginning to realize that choice implied having options. With Kate, he had none. In Vermont, Megan's world had suddenly expanded beyond her wildest dreams. Michael Carter had visited her the day before Lucas was born, bringing flowers and a business proposition that took her breath away. "I've seen your work," he'd said, his voice gentle but assured. "The sustainable housing designs you've been doing freelance, they're exactly what Burlington needs. I'd like to offer you a partnership in my firm." Michael was nothing like Derek. Where Derek was flashy and charismatic, Michael was steady and thoughtful. Where Derek made promises he couldn't keep, Michael spoke only about what was real and achievable. At 39, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived loss and found his way back to purpose. "I know your situation," he'd said carefully. "Laura's told me some of it. I want you to know that this offer has nothing to do with sympathy, and everything to do with talent. You're brilliant, and I'd be honored to work with you." Now, holding Lucas in the hospital bed, Megan felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. Back in Boston, Derek's future was imploding by the hour. His business partner James had called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. 3 more clients had terminated their contracts. The firm was hemorrhaging money, and Derek's personal scandal was poison to their reputation. Kate's response to his emotional distance had been swift and brutal. She'd started posting subtle social media updates, photos of herself at charity events with other men, captions about new opportunities and exciting developments. The message was clear. If Derek wouldn't commit publicly, she had other options. But her most devastating move came Sunday night. Derek's doorbell rang at 9 p.m. He opened it to find Kate standing there with a bottle of wine and a vindictive smile. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him into the house. "Kate, I told you. I know what you told me. And I know you've been avoiding me. But here's what you need to understand, Derek." She turned to face him, her beauty sharp as a blade. "I have photos, videos, screenshots of every text you sent me, every promise you made about leaving her, evidence of 8 months of you pursuing me, choosing me, telling me you loved me." Derek's blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your little disappeared wife might be playing the victim now, but wait until she sees proof of how enthusiastically you betrayed her. Wait until a judge sees evidence of your adultery when she files for custody of that baby." Kate's smile was predatory. "Unless, of course, we work together. As a team, as partners. You're blackmailing me. I'm protecting us," Kate corrected smoothly. "I invested 8 months in this relationship, Derek. I'm not walking away empty-handed because you're having a guilt crisis." That night, Derek sat in his empty house and finally understood what he'd gotten himself into. Kate wasn't just an affair. She was a carefully calculated trap, and he'd walked into it willingly, destroying everything he'd ever loved in the process. Meanwhile, in a quiet hospital room in Vermont, Megan nursed her newborn son and made plans for their future. She'd already decided to accept Michael's partnership offer. She'd build something beautiful, something honest, something that would make Lucas proud. "Just you and me now, little one," she whispered to the sleeping baby. "We're going to be just fine." For the first time since her marriage had crumbled, Megan believed those words completely. Derek's phone buzzed with another message from Kate. "Lunch tomorrow. We're going apartment hunting whether you like it or not. Don't test me, Derek. You won't like the consequences." He stared at the message until the screen went dark, seeing his reflection in the black glass. A stranger he no longer recognized. 6 months had passed since Lucas's birth, and the spring sunshine streaming through the windows of Carter and Mitchell Design Studio felt like a promise of better things to come. Megan stood at the drafting table, Lucas sleeping peacefully in his carrier beside her, while she reviewed the plans for Burlington's newest affordable housing project. "The city council loves it," Michael Carter said, entering the office with coffee and the kind of genuine smile that had become familiar and comforting. "They're calling it revolutionary, sustainable, beautiful, and actually affordable. You've outdone yourself, Megan." Megan felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. This was her work, her vision, her success. "We've outdone ourselves," she corrected. "This partnership is exactly what I needed." Michael's presence in her life had been a revelation, not romantic, though she sensed he cared for her deeply, but as a reminder of what healthy relationships looked like. He was reliable, honest, and never made her question her own worth. 300 miles south, Derek's world had become a living nightmare. The meeting with James had gone worse than he'd imagined possible. "We're dissolving the partnership," James had announced, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry, Derek, but I can't watch you destroy everything we built. The firm is hemorrhaging clients, and frankly, your judgment has become questionable." Derek had tried to argue, to explain, but the evidence was overwhelming. Their biggest client, the Rosewood Development Group, had terminated their contract after Kate had shown up drunk to a company dinner, making a scene about Derek's commitment issues in front of potential investors. Now Derek sat in his half-empty office, boxes stacked around him, watching Kate pace like a caged animal. "This is temporary," she insisted, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone case. "You'll start your own firm. I have contacts at Sterling & Associates who could send work your way." "With what money, Kate?" Derek's voice was hollow. "I'm being sued by 3 different clients. The house is going into foreclosure. I can barely afford groceries." Kate stopped pacing, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Then maybe it's time to use those divorce papers to your advantage. Your wife ran off with your child. That's abandonment. You could get full custody and child support." "I don't even know where they are," Derek said quietly. "And even if I did, even if you did what? You'd let her get away with humiliating you?" Kate's voice rose to a shriek. "She made you look like a fool, Derek. She disappeared like some dramatic teenager instead of fighting for her marriage. She left because of us," Derek said, the words tasting like ash. "Because I betrayed her trust every single day for 8 months." Kate's face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare blame me for this. You came to me, remember? You pursued me. You told me your marriage was over, that you'd never been happy with her. The terrible thing was, Derek could barely remember saying those words, though he must have. The man who had seduced Kate Burton felt like a stranger now, someone else wearing his face, destroying his life with surgical precision. His phone rang. His lawyer. Derek, we need to discuss the foreclosure proceedings. The bank is moving faster than expected. You have 30 days to bring the mortgage current or find a buyer. When Derek hung up, Kate was staring at him with undisguised contempt. You're pathetic, she said coldly. I wasted the best months of my life on someone who can't even keep his own house. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and vindictive. Call me when you remember how to be a man instead of a victim. After Kate left, Derek sat alone in the gathering darkness, too tired to turn on the lights. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your business partner's announcement about the firm closure. Sorry for your loss. J. James, who was probably at home with his wife and kids building the kind of life Derek had thrown away. Meanwhile, in Burlington, Megan was putting Lucas to bed in their cozy apartment above the design studio. The space was small but filled with warmth. Handmade quilts from Laura, toys from new friends, drawings and plans for the future covering every surface. Look what came today, Michael said, knocking softly on the doorframe. He held up a magazine, Architecture Today, open to a feature article titled, Rising Stars, Young Architects Changing Communities. There on page 3 was a photo of Megan standing in front of their completed affordable housing project, Lucas in her arms, both of them smiling. The article praised her innovative approach to sustainable design and her commitment to community building. They want to interview you for a follow-up piece, Michael said, his pride evident, about work-life balance and designing with families in mind. Megan stared at the magazine, hardly believing it was real. A year ago, she'd been making excuses for Derek's absences, questioning her own worth, shrinking herself to fit into his increasingly chaotic world. Now she was being recognized nationally for work that mattered. I never thought, she began, then stopped. She'd spent so many years thinking small, accepting less, that dreaming big still felt foreign. You never thought you deserved recognition? Michael finished gently. Megan, you're brilliant. You always were. Maybe now you're just in a place where people can see it clearly. That night, as Derek drove through Boston looking for an apartment he could afford, something far from the life he'd once known, Megan sat at her drafting table, sketching plans for their next project. Lucas slept peacefully nearby, and through the window she could see Michael's office light still on as he worked on the business proposal that would expand their firm. For the first time in her adult life, Megan was exactly where she belonged. Derek's phone buzzed with a message from Kate. Saw the article about your wife's little hobby business. Cute. Too bad you'll never be part of something that successful again. He turned off his phone and kept driving through the dark streets, a ghost haunting the ruins of his former life. The studio apartment in Dorchester was a far cry from the Beacon Hill brownstone Derek had called home for 3 years. Water stains marked the ceiling. The radiator clanged incessantly, and the smell of fried food from the restaurant downstairs permeated everything. But it was what he could afford, barely, after losing the house to foreclosure. Derek sat on the second-hand couch he'd bought from Craigslist, staring at his laptop screen. The freelance architectural projects he'd managed to scrape together paid a fraction of what he'd once earned. His reputation in Boston was toxic. Whispers followed him at every professional gathering he still dared to attend. His phone buzzed. Another text from Kate, the third this week. Heard about the apartment. Yikes. Hope you're not expecting me to visit that neighborhood. She'd been sending these little cruelties regularly since their breakup, if it could even be called that. Kate had simply stopped returning his calls after he'd lost the business, as if he'd ceased to exist the moment he could no longer provide her with the lifestyle she demanded. The final humiliation had come 2 weeks ago. Derek had run into Kate at a charity gala he was photographing as a side job, the only work he could find that paid cash. She'd been there as the guest of Bennett Holloway, heir to the Holloway shipping fortune, and everything Derek had once been. Derek? Kate had looked genuinely surprised to see him behind a camera instead of mingling with the donors. What are you doing here? Working, he'd said simply, adjusting his lens. Kate's laugh had been musical and cruel. Oh, that's how entrepreneurial of you. She'd leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. You know, I should thank you. If you hadn't fallen apart so spectacularly, I never would have met Bennett. He's taking me to the Hamptons next weekend. Derek had continued shooting, his hand steady even as his heart crumbled a little more. Through his viewfinder, he'd watched Kate charm donors, laugh at Bennett's jokes, and play the role of devoted girlfriend with the same skill she'd once used on him. Now, alone in his cramped apartment, Derek finally understood what he'd really been to Kate. Not a lover, but a stepping stone to something better. Meanwhile, 18 months had passed since Megan had given birth to Lucas, and her life had transformed beyond recognition. Carter and Mitchell Design Studio had grown from a two-person partnership to a thriving firm with 6 employees and projects across 3 states. The Anderson Foundation wants to discuss funding for the Affordable Housing Initiative, Michael announced, walking into Megan's office where she was reviewing blueprints while Lucas played with blocks at her feet. At 15 months old, Lucas was walking and babbling constantly, his personality a perfect blend of Megan's determination and her own father's gentle humor. He had never asked about Derek. There were no pictures of him in their home, no mentions of Daddy. In Lucas's world, family consisted of Mama, Uncle Michael, and Aunt Laura. That would fund 20 more units, Megan said, unable to hide her excitement. Families who've been on the waiting list for years could finally have homes. Michael smiled, but there was something else in his expression, something tender and uncertain. Megan, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, not about work. Before he could continue, Megan's phone rang. The caller ID made her blood freeze. Derek Dempsey. She hadn't heard from him in over a year. The divorce had been finalized through lawyers, with Derek signing away his parental rights in exchange for no child support obligations. He'd been a ghost, which was exactly how Megan preferred it. Don't answer it, Michael said quietly, recognizing the expression on her face. But Megan was curious. After all this time, what could Derek possibly want? Hello? She answered cautiously. Megan. Derek's voice was rough, exhausted. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Then why are you calling? There was a long pause. I saw the article in Architecture today about your housing project. It's beautiful work, the kind of work we used to dream about doing together. Megan felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. We never dreamed about anything together, Derek. You dreamed about making money and impressing clients. I dreamed about making a difference. You're right, Derek said quietly. You're absolutely right about everything. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you, proud of what you've built. It's a little late for pride, Megan replied, watching Lucas stack his blocks with intense concentration. What do you really want? Another pause. I wanted to ask about our son, about Lucas. Is he healthy? Happy? The question caught Megan off guard. In all her imaginings of this conversation, she'd never expected Derek to ask about Lucas with such genuine concern. He's perfect, she said finally. Smart, funny, kind, everything a mother could want. Does he ask about me? Megan's throat tightened. This was the question she'd been dreading. No, Derek, he doesn't. You're not part of his world, and that's how it needs to stay. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. I understand, Derek said finally. I needed you to know that walking away from you both was the biggest mistake of my life. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. After Derek hung up, Megan sat staring at her phone. Michael waited quietly, understanding that she needed a moment to process. Regret, she said finally. After all this time, after everything he destroyed, now he has regret. Does it change anything? Michael asked gently. Megan looked at Lucas, who had successfully built a tower almost as tall as himself. He clapped his hands in delight, then looked at her with Derek's brown eyes, the only part of his father he'd inherited. No, she said firmly. It doesn't change anything at all. That night, Derek sat in his empty apartment and called Kate one last time. What do you want? She answered, her voice sharp with annoyance. I just wanted to say goodbye, Derek said, and to tell you that you were right about one thing. I did get exactly what I deserved. Kate's laugh was cold as winter rain. Finally figured that out, did you? Don't call me again, Derek. I have a real life now. After she hung up, Derek deleted her number from his phone. Some chapters, he realized, needed to end completely before new ones could begin. But for Derek Dempsey, it might already be too late for new chapters. 2 years had passed since that painful phone call, and Megan stood in the backyard of the house she'd bought in Burlington's historic district, watching Lucas chase fireflies in the golden evening light. At 3 years old, he was a bundle of energy and curiosity, asking endless questions about everything he saw. Mama, look! Lucas pointed excitedly at a particularly bright firefly. It's dancing. It is dancing, Michael agreed, settling onto the porch swing beside Megan with 2 glasses of lemonade. Just like someone else I know when his favorite song comes on. Lucas giggled and spun in a circle, arms outstretched, completely uninhibited and joyful. Megan felt her heart swell watching him, this little person she'd created, who knew nothing but love, security, and encouragement. The Riverside Community Center project is moving forward, Michael said, handing her a glass. The city approved our design unanimously. 15,000 square feet of community space, all sustainable materials, all affordable programs. I still can't believe they chose our proposal, Megan replied, though her confidence had grown tremendously over the past 3 years. Carter and Mitchell Design Studio had become one of Vermont's most respected firms, specializing in sustainable community development. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching Lucas attempt to catch fireflies with gentle hands, the way Michael had taught him, never hurting, just observing their beauty. Megan, Michael said softly, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about, something personal. Before she could respond, Lucas came running over, breathless with excitement. Uncle Michael, can we make s'mores? Of course, buddy, Michael said, lifting Lucas onto his lap. But first I have something important to ask your mama. Megan's heart began to race as Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. Megan Mitchell, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. You and Lucas have made my life complete, in ways I never thought possible again after losing Sarah. You've taught me that love doesn't replace what we've lost. It adds something entirely new and beautiful. He opened the box to reveal a modest but exquisite sapphire ring, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the last rays of sunset. Will you marry me? Will you let me be the father Lucas deserves and the husband you both deserve? Lucas clapped his hands, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the moment. Say yes, Mama. Uncle Michael makes the best pancakes. Megan laughed through tears she didn't realize had started falling. Michael was everything Derek had never been. Present, honest, reliable, kind. He'd been there for every milestone of Lucas's life, every late night when teething kept them awake, every small triumph and setback. He'd never tried to replace Derek because there had never been a space for Derek to fill. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger and Lucas cheered, Megan felt the last piece of her old life finally, completely fall away. Meanwhile, in Boston, Derek was slowly, painfully attempting to rebuild his existence from the ground up. He'd spent the past year in therapy, working through the self-destructive patterns that had led him to destroy everything he'd once held dear. The studio apartment had been replaced by a small but clean 1-bedroom, and he'd found steady work with a restoration company that specialized in historic buildings. It wasn't glamorous. He spent his days repairing century-old masonry and replacing rotted window frames. But it was honest work that required skill and patience. More importantly, it was helping him remember who he'd been before ego and ambition had corrupted his judgment. His therapist, Dr. Amanda Reeves, had been blunt from their first session. You're here because you destroyed your marriage and lost your child through a series of selfish choices. The question is, are you ready to do the hard work of becoming someone different? Derek was trying. He attended AA meetings even though alcohol hadn't been his primary addiction. Validation and excitement had been his drugs of choice. He volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends, seeing firsthand what rock bottom really looked like for people without his privileges. But the hardest part was accepting that some damage couldn't be undone. Megan and Lucas were thriving without him, and they had every right to continue doing so. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Claire. Saw Megan's engagement announcement in the paper. She looks happy. Derek stared at the message for a long time before responding. Good. She deserves happiness. And he meant it, even though it felt like swallowing glass. 300 miles north, Kate Burton was discovering that karma had a sense of irony. Her relationship with Bennett Holloway had lasted exactly 6 months, until his family's private investigator had uncovered her pattern of targeting wealthy men, and the detailed documentation she kept of their affairs. Insurance policies, she'd called the photos and videos when confronted. Bennett had called them something else entirely. Now Kate sat in her cramped studio apartment in Cambridge, her designer wardrobe sold to pay rent, her social media followers dwindling as her access to exclusive events dried up. The marketing position at Sterling & Associates had been restructured after Bennett's family had made their displeasure known to the right people. She'd burned too many bridges, manipulated too many hearts, and left too much wreckage in her wake. The beautiful, ambitious woman who'd once commanded attention wherever she went now found herself invisible, irrelevant, and alone. Her phone rang. Another bill collector. Kate let it go to voicemail, just as she'd let Derek's final call go unanswered 2 years ago. Some choices, she was learning, had consequences that lasted far longer than the momentary pleasure they provided. Back in Burlington, Megan tucked Lucas into bed in their cozy house, the sapphire ring catching the light from his nightlight. "Tell me the story about the fireflies again," Lucas requested, his eyelids already heavy. "Once upon a time," Megan began, "there was a little boy who could catch magic in his hands without hurting it, and he lived in a house full of love with people who would never leave him." As Lucas drifted off to sleep, Megan stood in his doorway for a moment, marveling at the life they'd built. Tomorrow, she'd start planning a wedding. Next month, they'd break ground on the community center. Next year, who knew what dreams they'd turn into reality. For the first time since her marriage to Derek had ended, Megan was planning for forever again, and this time she knew it would last. The September morning was perfect for a wedding. Crisp autumn air, golden sunlight filtering through the maple trees, and the kind of peaceful silence that only small Vermont towns could offer. Megan stood before the mirror in Laura's guest bedroom, adjusting the simple but elegant cream-colored dress she'd chosen for her wedding to Michael. "You look radiant," Laura said, fastening the delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to Megan's grandmother. "Absolutely radiant." At 4 years old, Lucas was practically vibrating with excitement in his tiny navy suit, clutching the ring-bearer's pillow like a precious treasure. "Mama, is Uncle Michael going to be my daddy now?" Megan knelt down to his level, smoothing his dark hair that was so much like her own. "He's going to be your stepdad, sweetheart, and he loves you very much." "Good," Lucas declared with the matter-of-fact certainty of childhood. "I love him too. He teaches me how to build things." The ceremony was small, just 30 people gathered in the backyard of their home, which Michael had helped Megan transform into a garden paradise over the past year. White chairs arranged in neat rows, an archway covered in late-blooming roses, and string lights that would twinkle as evening fell. As Megan walked down the makeshift aisle, Lucas skipping ahead of her as ring-bearer, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle in her chest. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of the family they'd already become, the love they'd already built, the future they'd already started creating together. Michael waited at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears, as he watched the woman and child who had transformed his world approach. His own children, Emma and Jake, stood beside him as his best man and maid of honor, teenagers now who had embraced Megan and Lucas as family, with the resilience that comes from having already survived loss. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Megan's attention was focused entirely on Michael's face, on the promises they were about to make, on the life stretching out before them, like an uncharted map full of possibilities. 300 miles away, Derek sat in his therapist's office staring at the wedding announcement he'd seen in the Burlington Free Press. The photo showed Megan laughing as Lucas tugged on her dress, Michael's hand protectively on her shoulder, all three of them glowing with happiness. "How are you feeling about this?" Dr. Reeves asked gently. "Like I'm looking at the life I should have had," Derek answered honestly. "Like I'm watching someone else raise my son and love my wife the way I never learned how to." "Former wife," Dr. Reeves corrected. "And he's not your son anymore, Derek. You signed away those rights." The words hit like a physical blow, even though Derek knew they were true. "I know, seeing them so happy, it makes the regret feel fresh again." "Regret can be useful if it motivates change," Dr. Reeves said, "but it becomes destructive when it keeps you trapped in the past." Megan has moved on. Lucas has a father figure who's present and committed. Your job now is to build a life worth living, not to mourn the one you destroyed. Derek nodded, though the ache in his chest felt like it might never fully heal. He'd been sober for 2 years, employed for 18 months, and in therapy for the same amount of time. But some consequences, he was learning, were permanent. Meanwhile, in a rundown apartment complex in Somerville, Kate Burton stared at the same wedding announcement on her phone screen. The social media post had been shared by mutual acquaintances, people who had once been her friends before she'd burned those bridges in pursuit of bigger, better opportunities. "So happy for Megan and Michael. True love always wins," read one comment. "Beautiful family. Some people really do get their happy ending," read another. Kate threw her phone across the room, watching it skitter under the second-hand couch. At 31, she felt ancient, used up. discarded. The succession of relationships since Bennett had grown shorter and more desperate. Men could sense the desperation now, the way a predator smells fear. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed the toll of 3 years of stress, poor nutrition, and the kind of loneliness that ate away at you from the inside. The beautiful, confident woman who had once commanded Derek's attention was gone, replaced by someone bitter and diminished. There was a knock at her door, probably another eviction notice. Kate had been 3 months behind on rent since losing her latest job. The pattern was always the same: initial enthusiasm from employers, followed by gradual recognition of her manipulative tendencies, then inevitable termination. But when she opened the door, she found a process server with papers that made her blood run cold. "Catherine Burton, you're being served with a lawsuit for harassment and defamation by Bennett Holloway and Associates." Kate's hand shook as she read the documents. Screenshots of threatening texts she'd sent, recordings of vindictive voicemails, evidence of her attempts to damage Bennett's reputation after their breakup. The lawsuit was seeking damages that would bankrupt her completely. As the process server walked away, Kate realized that her chickens had finally come home to roost. Every manipulative game, every emotional trap, every heart she'd broken for personal gain had led her to this moment. Alone, broke, and facing the legal consequences of her own cruelty. Back in Burlington, Megan and Michael exchanged vows as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, respect, and genuine love," Michael said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to be the father Lucas deserves and the husband you both deserve. I promise that our family will always come first. I promise to trust again, to love fully, and to create a home where we can all grow and thrive," Megan replied, tears streaming down her face. "I promise that our children will know what real love looks like, and that our marriage will be built on truth, not illusion." As they kissed and their guests cheered, Lucas threw flower petals in the air with wild abandon, his laughter mixing with the sound of celebration. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and Lucas slept peacefully upstairs, Megan and Michael sat on their porch swing, wedding rings catching the light from the string bulbs overhead. "No regrets?" Michael asked softly. Megan thought about Derek, probably alone in his Boston apartment, and Kate, facing the consequences of her choices. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, afraid, diminished, accepting scraps of affection from a man who didn't value her. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." In the distance, a nightingale began to sing, and Megan smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new projects, new dreams, new possibilities for the family they'd chosen to build together. The conference room at the Boston Convention Center buzzed with excitement as architectural firms from across New England gathered for the annual Sustainable Design Awards. 5 years had transformed the industry, and Carter and Mitchell Design Studio had become the name everyone whispered with respect and admiration. Megan Carter, she'd taken Michael's name with pride, stood at the podium, her confidence radiating through the room as she presented their latest project, a revolutionary affordable housing complex that had been featured in Architectural Digest and copied by cities nationwide. "Sustainable design isn't just about environmental responsibility," she said, clicking to the next slide showing families moving into their beautiful, affordable homes. "It's about creating communities where people can thrive, where children can grow up safely, where neighbors become family." In the audience, Lucas, now 9 years old and the spitting image of his mother, watched with rapt attention from the front row beside Michael. He'd grown up attending these presentations, understanding from an early age that his mother's work changed people's lives. "That's my mom," he whispered proudly to the woman sitting next to him, who smiled warmly at his obvious adoration. Michael squeezed Lucas's shoulder, his own pride evident. Over the past 5 years, he'd legally adopted Lucas, who now carried the name Lucas Mitchell Carter and had never known a father other than Michael. The boy excelled in school, played soccer with enthusiasm, and had inherited both his mother's creativity and Michael's steady temperament. As Megan concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, she caught sight of a familiar figure near the back of the room. Her blood chilled as she recognized Derek Dempsey, older and more weathered than when she'd last seen him, but unmistakably the man who had once shared her life. Derek had been working for Heritage Restoration LLC for 3 years now, and his boss had insisted the entire team attend the conference to learn about modern sustainable techniques. He'd known there was a chance he might see Megan, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching her command a room full of industry leaders with such grace and authority. She was luminous, not just beautiful, but powerful in a way she'd never been during their marriage. The uncertain woman who had once sought his approval for every decision had become someone who clearly needed no one's validation but her own. After the presentation, Derek watched from a distance as Megan was surrounded by admirers, potential clients, and journalists wanting interviews. He saw Lucas, his son, though the boy would never know it, animated and happy as he chatted with other attendees about his mother's work. The resemblance was there in the boy's dark eyes and stubborn chin, but everything else, his confidence, his easy smile, his obvious security and his place in the world, came from the life Megan had built for him. "Incredible presentation," said a voice beside Derek. He turned to see a well-dressed man in his 50s extending his hand. "I'm James Whitfield from the Anderson Foundation. We've been following Carter and Mitchell's work for years. Revolutionary stuff." "Yes," Derek agreed quietly. "She always was brilliant." James studied Derek's face. "You know Megan Carter?" "We worked together a long time ago." It wasn't quite a lie, but it felt like one. As the crowd began to disperse, Derek found himself walking toward the exit when he heard his name. "Derek?" He turned to find Megan standing 10 feet away, her expression unreadable. Up close, she looked even more remarkable, poised, successful, genuinely happy in a way he'd never seen during their marriage. "Hello, Megan." His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "I saw you in the audience." She glanced around, clearly ensuring they weren't drawing attention. "What are you doing here?" "I work for Heritage Restoration now. We're learning about sustainable integration with historic preservation." Megan nodded slowly. "That's good. You always loved old buildings." The conversation felt surreal. Two strangers making polite small talk about a shared past that felt like it belonged to different people entirely. "I saw your son," Derek said carefully. "Lucas. He looks happy." "He is happy," Megan replied firmly. "He has a wonderful life, a loving family, and everything he needs." "I'm glad." Derek meant it, even though saying it felt like swallowing broken glass. You look incredible, Megan. Successful, happy." "I am." There was no malice in her voice, but no warmth either. "We both are." Behind Megan, Derek could see Michael approaching with Lucas, clearly protective but not aggressive. The man who had replaced him in every way that mattered, moved with quiet confidence, his hand naturally finding Megan's lower back in a gesture of support and possession. "Dad, the reporter from Design Weekly wants to interview you about the Portland project," Lucas said to Michael, not even noticing Derek standing nearby. Derek's heart clenched hearing another man called Dad by his biological son, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Megan?" Michael's voice was gentle but alert. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, not taking her eyes off Derek. "Michael, Lucas, this is Derek Dempsey. He's an old colleague." Michael's expression didn't change, but Derek could see the recognition in his eyes. This man knew exactly who he was, and what he'd done. "Mr. Dempsey," Michael said politely, extending his hand for a brief, firm shake. "I've heard of your restoration work. Impressive projects." The civility was worse than anger would have been. Derek realized he was looking at everything he could have been. A devoted husband, a present father, a man who put his family first without question. "I should go," Derek said quietly. "Congratulations on your success, Megan. You deserve everything good that's happened to you." As Derek walked away, he heard Lucas ask, "Who was that man, Mom?" "Someone from my past," Megan replied. "Someone who taught me what I didn't want in my life." Derek didn't look back, but those words followed him out of the convention center and onto the busy Boston streets. After 5 years of therapy, honest work, and genuine attempts at self-improvement, he was still nothing more than a cautionary tale in his own son's life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd come to this conference to learn about building better structures, but he'd been confronted with the evidence of everything he'd failed to build and everything he'd destroyed. 6 months after the conference encounter, Derek Dempsey sat in his therapist's office for what would be their final session. Dr. Reeves had been clear. After 4 years of work, Derek had made significant progress, but he was clinging to therapy as a way to avoid fully accepting his new reality. "You've done the work, Derek," she said kindly but firmly. "You're sober, employed, and you've developed healthy coping mechanisms. But you're still trying to process losing a family that was never really yours to begin with. What do you mean? Derek asked, though he suspected he knew. You were never fully present in your marriage. You were always looking for something else, something more exciting. Megan and Lucas weren't losses. They were escapes from a situation you'd already emotionally abandoned. The truth of it hit Derek like a physical blow. He'd spent 4 years mourning a life he'd never actually valued when he had it. Meanwhile, in Burlington, Megan was experiencing the most fulfilling period of her life. Carter and Mitchell Design Studio had just been awarded a contract to design sustainable housing for 3 New England cities. The work was meaningful, profitable, and exactly aligned with her values. But the real joy came from smaller moments. Lucas scoring his first soccer goal and running straight to Michael for a celebration hug. Family dinners where everyone actually listened to each other. Quiet evenings where she and Michael planned their future without fear or uncertainty. Mom, can you help me with my presentation? Lucas asked one evening, spreading his school project across the dining table. It's about family trees. Megan's heart skipped slightly. This was the conversation she'd been dreading since Lucas started school. I put you and Dad, Lucas said, pointing to photos of Megan and Michael, and Emma and Jake as my siblings, and Grandma and Grandpa Hayes. He continued mapping out Michael's extended family with the unconscious certainty of a child who had never questioned his place in the world. What about your biological father? Megan asked gently. Lucas looked confused. What do you mean? Well, Dad adopted you when you were little, but before that you had a biological father. Lucas considered this for a moment with the serious expression he wore when processing new information. Do I need to include him? Only if you want to. Did he want to be my dad? Megan chose her words carefully. He made choices that meant he couldn't be the father you deserved. Lucas nodded sagely. Then I don't need to include him. Dad is my dad. Biology doesn't make a family, love does. At 9 years old, Lucas had articulated something Derek had never understood. That same week, Kate Burton received her final eviction notice. The lawsuit from Bennett Holloway had resulted in a judgment that garnished her wages and destroyed what remained of her credit. At 34, she was moving back in with her mother in a small town outside Worcester, her dreams of wealth and status reduced to a cautionary tale, whispered among her former social circle. Her last attempt at manipulation, trying to blackmail a married city councilman she'd briefly dated, had backfired spectacularly when he'd reported her to police. The restraining order was just the latest legal consequence of behavior that had spiraled completely out of control. As Kate packed her few remaining possessions, she found herself thinking about Derek and Megan. She'd destroyed their marriage for her own gain, but what had she actually gained? A few months of expensive dinners and luxury hotel rooms, followed by years of increasing desperation and diminishing returns. She'd been beautiful, smart, and ambitious, qualities that could have built a legitimate life. Instead, she'd used them as weapons, and weapons eventually cut the people who wield them. 2 weeks later, Derek was walking through Boston Common when he saw a familiar figure on a park bench. Kate looked years older than her 34 years, her once perfect appearance now showing the wear of stress and hardship. Kate? She looked up, startled. Derek, I didn't expect to see you. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, 2 people who had destroyed lives together but barely knew each other. I heard about Megan, Kate said finally. The awards, the success. She did well for herself. She did. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't? Kate trailed off. If we hadn't had an affair? Derek finished. If we hadn't destroyed my marriage and family? Yes, Kate. I think about it every day. I didn't destroy anything, Kate said defensively. You made your choices. We both made choices, Derek replied quietly. And we both have to live with the consequences. Kate's facade cracked slightly. I never thought it would end like this. Alone, broke, irrelevant. I thought I was smart enough to play the game and win. There was no game to win, Derek said. That was the problem. We treated real people's lives like chess pieces, and chess pieces don't fight back. But people do. They leave. They move on. They build better lives without us. As Derek walked away from Kate for the last time, he felt something shift inside him. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. He'd spent 5 years trying to undo his mistakes, but some mistakes couldn't be undone. They could only be learned from. That evening, Megan tucked Lucas into bed in their beautiful home, surrounded by photos of family vacations, school achievements, and everyday moments of joy. Michael was downstairs reviewing blueprints for their next project, a community center that would serve 3 low-income neighborhoods. "Mom," Lucas said sleepily, "I'm glad our family is the way it is." "Me too, sweetheart. Do you think people who make bad choices ever get to be happy again?" Megan considered the question seriously. "I think people can learn from their mistakes and build better lives. But some choices have consequences that last forever. That's why it's important to think carefully about how we treat the people we love. Like how Dad always keeps his promises to us?" Exactly like that. As Megan turned off the light, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 5 years ago, she'd been a broken woman fleeing a marriage built on lies. Now she was a successful architect, loving wife, and confident mother who had built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The difference wasn't luck or timing. It was choice. She'd chosen truth over comfortable lies, self-respect over false hope, and genuine love over the illusion of passion. Derek and Kate had made different choices, and they were living with different consequences. Outside, snow began to fall gently over Burlington, covering the town in pristine white, a blank canvas full of possibilities for those wise enough to choose their colors carefully. In Boston, Derek sat in his small apartment, finally understanding that some stories don't have redemption arcs. They have learning arcs. He couldn't fix what he'd broken, but he could ensure he never broke anything again. And Kate? Kate was learning that when you spend your life using people, you eventually find yourself with no one left to use. The moral was clear. Betrayal doesn't just destroy the trust others place in you. It destroys your ability to build anything worth keeping. Megan had learned this lesson early enough to save herself. Derek and Kate had learned it too late to save anything at all. 10 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Carter and Mitchell Design Studio headquarters in downtown Burlington, illuminating the wall of awards and commendations that had accumulated over the past decade. At the center hung a framed magazine cover from Architecture Today featuring Megan Carter as Architect of the Year, a recognition that had come not just for her innovative designs, but for her commitment to creating communities where families could thrive. Megan, now 44 and more beautiful than ever with confidence that radiated from within, stood in her corner office reviewing the plans for their latest project, a sustainable housing development that would house 500 families. The 14-year-old boy doing homework at the conference table in her office looked up and smiled. Lucas, tall for his age and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a child who had never doubted his place in the world. "Mom, Mr. Peterson wants to interview me for the school newspaper about what it's like having an award-winning architect for a mother," Lucas said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of adolescence. "And what are you going to tell him?" Megan asked, settling into the chair beside him. "That you're the most hard-working person I know, that you taught me that success comes from helping others, and that," Lucas paused, his expression growing more serious, "that you showed me what real love looks like by choosing Dad and building our family." Michael appeared in the doorway, now 54 and distinguished, with the silver temples that made him even more handsome than when Megan had first met him. In his hands were the latest proposals from 3 different cities wanting Carter and Mitchell to design their affordable housing initiatives. "How's my family doing?" he asked, a ritual greeting that never failed to make Megan's heart flutter even after 8 years of marriage. "We're perfect," Lucas answered automatically, and he meant it. At 14, he excelled in school, played varsity soccer, and volunteered at the community center his parents had designed. He had friends, confidence, and the kind of emotional security that came from never wondering if he was loved or wanted. Michael kissed Megan's forehead and squeezed Lucas's shoulder. Small gestures that had been repeated thousands of times and never lost their significance. "Emma's graduation is next month," Michael said, referring to his daughter who was finishing her master's degree in environmental engineering. "She wants to join the firm after she gets her license. And Jake's accepted at MIT, Megan added, pride evident in her voice when she spoke of Michael's son, now her son, who had become a robotics prodigy. Their blended family had worked because it was built on truth, commitment, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Every member knew they were valued, protected, and essential. 200 miles away in a subsidized housing complex outside Boston, Derek Dempsey prepared for another day of work at the community center, where he'd been employed for the past 3 years. At 51, he looked older than his years, the weight of regret and missed opportunities carved into the lines around his eyes. His small apartment was clean but sparse, decorated only with photos of the buildings he'd helped restore, and letters from the young men he mentored in his addiction recovery group. It was an honest life, but a solitary one. Derek had never remarried, never had other children, not because he couldn't have, but because he'd learned through painful experience that he wasn't capable of the selflessness that real love required. Better to live alone than to destroy another family. On his desk was a newspaper clipping from the previous month, an article about Carter and Mitchell's latest award, featuring a photo of Megan, Michael, and Lucas at the ceremony. Lucas looked so much like Derek at that age, but everything else about the boy, his posture, his smile, his obvious confidence, came from the life Megan had built for him. Derek had stopped hurting when he saw these articles. The pain had been replaced by something quieter, acceptance that some consequences were permanent, and that his role in their story was to serve as a reminder of what not to do. In a nursing home in Worcester, Kate Burton, now going by her mother's maiden name, Catherine Walsh, worked the night shift as a care aide. At 44, she looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. The beauty that had once been her weapon was gone, replaced by the hollow look of someone who had used up all their chances. She'd never recovered from the financial and social ruin that had followed her pattern of manipulation and exploitation. Men avoided her now, warned away by a reputation that preceded her everywhere she went. The lawsuits, restraining orders, and criminal charges had created a digital footprint that made reinvention impossible. Sometimes during her long shifts caring for elderly patients who couldn't remember her name from day to day, Kate thought about the different life she could have built if she'd chosen differently. She could have used her intelligence and ambition legitimately. She could have built something lasting instead of burning through other people's trust for temporary gain. But those thoughts always ended the same way. It was too late for different choices. This was the life her decisions had created. Back in Burlington, the Carter family sat down to their traditional Sunday dinner, a ritual that had anchored their weeks for nearly a decade. Emma and Jake were home from college, the table full of laughter and conversation about everything from environmental policy to Lucas's upcoming high school applications. "You know what I love about our family?" Lucas said during a rare, quiet moment. "We actually like each other. Not just love each other because we have to, but actually enjoy being together. That's because we chose each other," Megan replied, meeting Michael's eyes across the table. "Every day we keep choosing each other." Later that evening, after the kids had settled into homework and phone calls with friends, Megan and Michael sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Any regrets?" Michael asked, the same question he'd posed on their wedding night 8 years ago. Megan considered the question seriously, as she always did. She thought about the woman she'd been 15 years ago, uncertain, diminished, accepting scraps of affection from a man who couldn't see her worth. She thought about the fear that had nearly paralyzed her when she'd discovered Derek's betrayal, and the courage it had taken to walk away from everything familiar. She thought about Derek, probably alone in his small apartment, and Kate, working nights in a job that barely paid her bills. Their choices had led them to isolation and regret, while her choice to value herself had led to abundance and joy. "Not a single one," she said finally, the same answer she'd given 8 years ago and every year since. "Even about Derek? About the pain you went through?" Megan shook her head slowly. "That pain taught me what I would and wouldn't accept. It led me to you, to this life, to this family. If I hadn't experienced betrayal, I might not have recognized genuine love when I found it." As the stars appeared overhead, Megan reflected on the profound truth she'd learned. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you, but only if you choose to learn from it instead of being destroyed by it. Derek and Kate had let their worst impulses define their destinies. Megan had used her worst experience to build her best life. In the end, that made all the difference. The moral was written in the lives they'd built. Integrity creates lasting happiness, while betrayal creates lasting loneliness. Some lessons can only be learned through consequence, and some consequences last forever. Megan had learned early enough to save herself and her son. Derek and Kate had learned too late to save anything at all. The end. What we do in life echoes in eternity, but how we choose to heal from betrayal determines whether that echo is one of wisdom or regret. What would you have done in Megan's situation? When Megan discovered Derek's betrayal through social media on their wedding anniversary while 8 months pregnant, she chose to quietly pack her bags and disappear rather than confront him or fight for her marriage. Some people say she should have fought harder, demanded explanations, or given Derek a chance to end the affair and save their family. Others believe she made the right choice by protecting her dignity and her unborn child's future. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.